Imagine this. You live in the Midwest of America, in Missouri. You've lived there all your life, you're married to a lovely lady, she's a nurse, you work in IT, and you're happy. But then you have a child, and you realise that America might not be the place that you want to raise a family.
Our daughter was 1 and she was in a daycare. We were told that they were going to start doing intruder drills at daycare. So at the age of 1, they start preparing kids for what happens if somebody comes into your school with a gun.
In this week's episode, you're going to meet Ben. Ben and his wife and his little girl moved to New Zealand from the most rural part of America to the most cosmopolitan place in New Zealand. They're living in the North Shore, Auckland, and today he's going to share with you all the differences, both good and bad, that he's encountered while moving to New Zealand.
It's a Drama, coming to you from Taranaki, New Zealand.
Hello.
Daddy, I love him!
Mother thanks you.
Right, Mr. DeMille, I'm ready for my close-up.
Ben, welcome to the podcast. I am thrilled to have you here with me today.
Thank you. I'm thrilled to be on.
I'm going to jump straight in. Tell me a little bit about your family and let's start with that. Who are you and where did you come from in the United States?
Sure. My name's Ben. I am 35. I work in information technology project management, and I've been in that field for a little over 5 years now. I'm married to a lovely lady named Kira. She's a registered nurse and a certified case manager. We have a 4-year-old daughter who will be 5 at the end of January. And we grew up in a small town outside of St. Louis, Missouri in the United States. And then we ended up moving to St. Louis in 2018 and then lived there until we moved to New Zealand.
Apologize in advance for my ignorance when it comes to geography. So whereabouts is Missouri in the United States?
Sure. So Missouri and Illinois are part of the Midwest, which is really the central northern part of the states. I believe the Midwest is quantified from the censure, which is capturing who lives where in the country. There is a lot of farmland and there are sporadically big cities, but mostly it's small rural communities.
Okay. Have you always lived in the US?
My wife and I are both from a small town in Illinois. We lived there our whole lives until we moved 45 minutes west to St. Louis,
right,
which is across the Mississippi River. And then from there, we took the plunge and moved all the way to New Zealand.
Do you know what? I've always wanted to meet someone from Illinois, from that area, the Mississippi, because when you were a kid and you used to watch all these films about Huckleberry Finn and things like that, and it was always like, you just think, oh, I'd love to just be, is that where that area is from? Is that where Huckleberry Finn? Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's more down south. So the Mississippi starts all the way at the northern parts of the state, basically cuts the country in half on its way down. But it was a very big hub, historically speaking. A lot of people would make settlements on the Mississippi because you would have to take ferries to move goods up and down the Mississippi.
And that's why I'm just thrilled to be talking to you today, because as we discussed when we were talking about doing this podcast together, a lot of our guests are from like big cities and they come from Los Angeles and San Francisco, New York and Canada and London. And so I was really keen to talk to someone who'd come from, like you say, you've lived in this rural settlement all your life, and then why leave? I assume your family are all there and you had a good job. And so why all of a sudden do you want to leave and move to the other side of the world?
We did. And that's a very complex question. I will say the deciding factor for us to want to leave was having a child. We did all of this for our daughter to give her the best start and best chance she could have. New Zealand has a wonderful reputation for the emphasis on children when they grow up. Everything is very kid-friendly and kid-centric here, which is not the same from where we're from. It's more of the parent's job to keep the child under control when you're out at a restaurant. Growing up in the States, whereas here they have areas for kids to play at, which like the first time we encountered that, we were like, really? This is so cool to let the kid play until the food's ready and then they can come sit down and eat a meal. So our daughter, she's at the forefront of all of the decision making. And you're right, all of our family is back in the Illinois, Missouri area. And that was a really hard choice to make, but ultimately we thought it would be the best decision for our family. And that's why we decided to do it.
So Kira is a nurse.
Mm-hmm.
You're working in IT. You have your little girl and you decide, okay, we want to give her the best start in life. We want her to grow up in a country that embraces children's freedom and just that. And you know what? I'm so glad you said that, because I'd forgotten about that, because it's been a while since we moved, and I forgot that shock that I felt when I went to a restaurant with Sonny and Tess and no one was looking at me as if, what, your kid's playing up? Like, why are they keep your kid under control? You're so right. And I'd forgotten about that. So thank you for reminding us about that, because it's huge. It's so stressful, isn't it? When you're going to a cafe with a child and they start being a bit naughty, and all of a sudden you start getting these looks from other parents as if, you should be keeping your child under control. So yeah, thank you for that. Thank you for reminding me about that. So back to you. Have you ever been to New Zealand, or how did you even find out about New Zealand?
Yeah, so I'm a very analytical type person. So I can give you a little bit of backstory. So essentially what happened, and I think a lot of people in America will understand where Kira and I are coming from with this. Our daughter was 1, and she was in a wonderful daycare, like 5 minutes from our house in St. Louis. And then we were told that they were going to start doing intruder drills at daycare. So at the age of 1, they start preparing kids for what happens if somebody comes into your school with a gun. And I was shocked and appalled. And we really did a lot of soul searching about, is this where we want our child to be, when it is always a possibility that it could happen. From anywhere in the world, all the shootings that happen in the United States. And growing up in that environment, I think when the first school shooting happened in the late 90s, it was a one-off occurrence, and then they became more prevalent. But by the time Kira and I were out of high school, it wasn't impacting our life at that point. But then you have a child, and then it's now 10 times worse than it was. And we just decided that we couldn't live with ourselves if anything would have happened to our daughter. And really the only way to make a change is to leave, because there's not an end in sight for gun reform or changing the current trajectory of gun violence in the United States. So and I've always been a big dreamer. And then Kira will send me back to reality. Hey, what do you think about moving here? And she'd be like, no, we're okay. Like, we have a nice life, a nice home. We don't need to do that. And then when I presented New Zealand to her, that was the first time where she was like, let's do some research. Let's see what we can find out about it. So I did 500 hours of research, and I stumbled upon this podcast during that journey. And I think the guests you have on provide valuable insight to people who are considering making the move, because you get hands-on experience and testimony about the steps they took to make it happen. From the time we spoke about it to the time it happened, it was, I think, a little over 3 years from a concept to fruition. And it was a long journey, but I think in our lives, nothing that has been rewarding has come easy.
No.
And this is just another example of that. So
Yeah.
we had to work really hard for this. Kira had to go back to school to get her bachelor's in nursing, which was something that was always on her to-do list. You get carried away with life. And then this gave her the goal to want to do that. So she went back to school. It took a year. And then I was the one who decided we should try to immigrate on my visa, because my job qualifications are also on the green list tier 1. And I built like an Excel tracker about how many jobs I applied to per month. Did I get a genuine response back from that employer, or was it like an automated email message? Did the job lead to an interview? If it did lead to an interview, did it lead to an offer? So I applied to 220 jobs, a 13-month period, and I only had 2 interviews during that time. Both interviews went really well, but ultimately I was passed on because I wasn't in the country. So after that 13-month journey, we decided to look into an option for Kira to be the primary visa holder
Mm.
And our licensed immigration advisor actually found a job and was like, hey, I think you'd be a good fit for this. And then she had one interview, one job offer, and then we're here. So it happened really quickly, but I think it was meant to be. It happened at the right time for the right reasons.
So can I just ask, why, when Kira was a registered nurse, didn't you just think, oh, we'll just come over? Why did you make it come over on your visa? Why didn't you just use Kira's visa to come over?
Sure, that's a good question. There are many different visa types. And I think the most common one that people come over on is the accredited employer work visa, which means essentially a company is sponsoring you to come to the country and you are tied to that job for a certain number of months or years. And I'm fine with working 40 plus hours. I was just thinking, if I'm the primary visa holder, Kira could potentially get like a part-time job and spend more time with our daughter, which is what she expressed she wanted. And I completely agreed with. Unfortunately, it didn't work out that way, but we did come over on straight to residency visa, which means we're not tied to an employer for work. She could leave her job tomorrow and then there's no implications about us needing to leave. But caveat, she loves her current job and she's doing a really good job there. Yeah, that's background to that.
I want to jump in and talk to you about the cost of living in New Zealand when you arrive. But before I do this, and again, when I ask these questions, I say, oh God, I hope everyone's not going to think I'm a complete moron when I say this and a complete... But is there anywhere in America that you could just think, I can move there and I would feel safe? Or is the whole of America, like all that massive country, does it all feel the same? Is it just leave and that's...
Yeah, no, I think it's a really good question. And I imagine that people in different parts of the country would have a different response to that question. Again, the continental United States is really enormous. It is hard to quantify how big it is. Texas alone, you can drive from the western side to the eastern side for over 14 hours before you exit the state.
Wow.
Like that's one state. It is the biggest state. Just for context, it's an enormous landmass. I would think probably the place that would feel the safest would be like the Hawaiian Islands, because they have their own kind of culture. And I'm not too up to date on their gun laws, but I imagine they do have restrictions in place. But I think that as an American growing up in America, you have paranoia ingrained in you. And there's a lot of divisiveness in the country. But I really think people live and operate in two different ways in America. It's the views you have and subscribe to on the internet are much different than like your everyday experience you have out in public. Like people don't talk about views on guns or politics or religion out in the open. That's not a thing. So in America, you can get along with anybody as long as you know the topics to avoid, I guess you could say. But it is a great place and there's a lot of opportunity. I think America is probably the best place to be an entrepreneur if you want to just start a business. It's more millionaires are made in America every year than anywhere else in the world. But I also think that when it's probably the same all over the world, if you are lower middle class or below, it's hard, right? You're surviving. You probably have to work multiple jobs to pay your rent. And you might struggle to make sure you have food in between every paycheck, and people rely on social services to make ends meet. But I'm sure that's true everywhere in the world. I just can speak to the American experience. Kira and I were very fortunate we grew up in middle or lower middle class households, and we went to school. Her path was different than mine. She went to college right out of high school, whereas I did some soul searching and worked in retail for a number of years before I decided I want to pursue higher education to give me better opportunities. Student loans, that's a whole nother topic. I know people who have amassed over $100,000 in student debt, and it's really easy to do, especially when you're 18 and you don't know what that means. Like you're going to be paying a loan into your 50s or 60s potentially, right? And then that's income that you will never see out of every single paycheck. And then home ownership is, depending on where you are in the country, is much easier to obtain right? So in California and Florida and Oregon, Washington, the coastal cities, cost of living is much, much higher than where we grew up. Like we were able to have a really big house in a pretty nice neighborhood for $250,000. And then you compare that to New Zealand and it's unheard of, right?
Yeah.
So where we lived, is in a bubble of its own where people, if you worked hard and both spouses had good jobs, you could become a homeowner and you could afford to raise multiple children if that was your desire. But I know when you get to city centers that are populous and it's harder to do that. It drives up the cost of not only real estate, but just your general cost of living expenses are more extreme in the big cities.
Do you know what, Ben? Thank you so much for sharing all that, because I speak to loads of Americans in the community and both here on the podcast, and I'm always a bit embarrassed to ask, what is it really? What is it like to live there as an American? And I really appreciate you being honest and open about that. And you've really just given us a good look into what life feels like for you if you live in America. So I really appreciate that. Thank you for your honesty.
Yeah, sure. And again, that's my experience, right? You've interviewed 50 people, they might all have a different opinion about things, but I think that there are certainly more affordable parts of the country, but it's also, how do you afford to move there if you have nothing, right? So you get trapped where you're from. And I think there's a statistic that 50% of Americans never move more than 20 miles away from the town they grew up in.
Right.
So half of everyone just stays where they're at.
And is that because they can't afford to move, or because they just want their community, or?
I imagine it's a number of things, but a lot of people just are very family oriented. So you want to stay close to your family, and that's your safety net. And you might want to take care of your parents when they get older. And I'm sure there's a number of reasons.
So going back to your family, before we bring you into New Zealand and your story in New Zealand, going back to your family, I'm picturing you live in this, like I say, this tight-knit community. You've got your lovely house, you've both got jobs. I know about the gun thing with your little girl at 1 year old, which would, again, it's just, it doesn't even come into it, does it? It's just once your child is at risk, it just, everything else goes out the window, doesn't it? But even so, you're going to be taking your family away from all her family, I would imagine grandparents and aunties and uncles and things. How did your family react to you, who's never moved out of America, never been, like you say, you just moved 20 minutes up the road? How did they feel when you told them we're going to be going to New Zealand?
We told our family pretty early on in the process that we were thinking about it. And I can't speak for them, right? They might have met that with skepticism. Sure you will, right? Okay. But I feel like it did benefit us to start that conversation early and let everybody know that's what we're working towards. And Kira and I tried to emphasize spending quality time with our family and friends because we knew we were going to be in America for a finite amount of time. Like there would eventually come to a time where we're going to leave. So we tried to maximize our time with family and friends. And then we stayed at my parents' house for a couple of weeks before we moved. Like when our house was on the market, our suitcases, we took all that to my parents' house. And then we also had a going away party where we invited everybody we know to come say a final farewell. It's certainly hard on my parents and Kira's parents that we took their grandchild, and a lot of tears were had when that moment finally came, but we try to do video calls as much as possible. So Cora, our daughter, knows who they are and continues to have that relationship. She won't forget. And then my parents are planning to come in January, which will be a really fun thing to do. Show them where we are now and the new life we're building, and they can spend really quality time with their grandchild.
Whereabouts in New Zealand are you?
We are in the north shore of Auckland. So Auckland is the biggest city in New Zealand. We are across the Harbor Bridge, which is just north of the CBD. And honestly, Auckland was very low on our places we wanted to move to. We actually had our sight set on Christchurch for a number of reasons. It seemed very similar in size to St. Louis, and it's relatively flat. So if you wanted to cycle places, you could do that. But that being said, we had to go where the job offer was. The job offer was in the North Shore of Auckland, and we have just been so pleasantly surprised by how beautiful it is here. It's absolutely gorgeous. We just are coming out of the winter time, and I don't think it was ever colder than 50 degrees Fahrenheit, which the winters in St. Louis, it can snow and be freezing cold. Sometimes you can't even leave the house. It's so cold. So to experience a winter where it's like nice and warm and the sun shines, it did rain quite a bit, but again, that's not really something to complain about from where we came from. But it's beautiful. It is absolutely astounding. There are beaches within walks or short drives all over the place. And there's so many great restaurants and cafes, and the people have been very friendly and kind. Obviously, we stick out like a sore thumb with our accents, but it's always met with curiosity, and people are just very happy to have a conversation with you.
So you've gone from what sounds like the cheapest area in America to the most expensive part of New Zealand that you could probably.
Yeah.
So how's that work?
It did work out that way, didn't it? I think we just had to recalibrate expectations about how much money goes to what. So in the States, the rule of thumb is to keep your housing expenses at or under 30% of your take-home pay, which where we're from is certainly possible. I don't think that metric can really apply to everywhere in America anymore, but the figure here is 50%. So that's a pretty drastic increase for cost of living, but we're in a really nice apartment building. It has 3 bedrooms and a dedicated office space. It has 2 full baths. Kitchen appliances came with the apartment. It came with like outside patio furniture, and the beds were included. We just had to buy couches and a dining room table, really. So I think that it is, unless you can afford the higher bracket of the cost per week in New Zealand. So that's another big difference, right? In America, everything is a monthly charge.
Yeah.
Here, a lot of things are billed per week. So I'm always doing math in my head to see what that factors have to be per month. But we were fortunate enough to save for this, right? It took us 3 years to get here. So we aggressively saved as much money as we could. And then we sold our house, which isn't as much as other people probably made off the sale of a home, but we have not touched that money yet. We're
Well done.
saving it for hopefully maybe a down payment on a home if we decide to buy here. It has been a bit shocking how much more expensive things are. But again, we make good amount of money at our jobs, and we're in a position that a lot of other people probably aren't.
Yeah. That's what I was going to say. So, because I know a lot of people that are considering moving to New Zealand, they look at Auckland, North Shore, and they're just like, obviously, it would be wonderful to live there because it's got such a fabulous reputation, like you say, for all the cafes and the beauty of it. And you're so close to Auckland, and that's so metropolitan. And that's just like the best place that everyone can think of is just, wow, Auckland. So you don't have to give me any figures, but does your jobs, are they paying you enough to afford to live there? Do you get more money if you obviously get more money when you live in Auckland, don't you? Because you've got the cost of living.
Sure.
Yeah.
So that's a really great question. The cost of living is calibrated based on the city or the closest city that you would be in New Zealand. What my qualifications, what they earn me here in Auckland would probably be $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 less if I was in Christchurch,
Right.
just because the cost of living is so drastically different down there. But yeah, we do good. We do all right. We're able to save some money. I've only had 2 paychecks since I started my new job. I'm paid monthly here, which is a bit different. I used to be paid every other week. Trying to budget for a month is a bit different, but Kira is paid every other week. So, and then I built a very extensive tracker going back 3 months on our expenses to see how much we're spending on what and was it higher than we were anticipating. And the short answer is yes, we were spending way more money on food and eating out and cafes than we thought we were. So we're reining that in a bit. but we also want to be mindful. We moved here not to restrict ourselves, right? We want to enjoy life and live life. So we do have restaurants in our budget.
Yeah. Yeah. God, I wish I was like you. I would absolutely love to have a big spreadsheet telling me how much I was spending because, yeah, I'm rubbish when it comes to, I have no idea how much I'm spending. And then I get to the end of the month and I haven't got any money left. And I'm just, where's it all gone? So that's great that you're doing that. You did say earlier that you were into analytics and figures and things. And I have to say as well that the post that you put on our private community, our Slack post, our Slack community, you put some brilliant stuff on there about finding a job and all the things that you had to go through to find a job. I just want to say thank you in public for that. So you're in New Zealand. How's Cora enjoying it? How is she settled?
She's absolutely thriving here. We're so happy. And I won't lie, the first couple months were really difficult, not only for her, but for us, right? You question yourselves. Did you make the right choice? Is this really what we want to do? But now that we're settled into our routine, I think the answer is a resounding yes. This is certainly the best thing we could have done for family. And of course, she's so amazing. It's really great to watch her come home from her daycare and tell us all about what she learned, and just watching her have fun on the beachside playgrounds here and be a kid, right? She gets to enjoy being a kid, which is so important.
Yeah, it really is. It really is. And I'm glad you said that although how long have you been in New Zealand?
Since May. So just over 5 months. I think it was 5 months last week.
Okay. So still quite early days. And I'm glad you said that about it's been difficult because I was talking to someone about this the other week and I honestly thought I wasn't really settled and I don't want to say happy, but I wasn't really settled is the word. I just kept doubting myself all the time. And it took me about 2 years to feel like completely and utterly 100% you've done the right thing. So I'm glad you mentioned that because I think it's important that people know that when they come over, it's completely natural to just go, oh no, what have we done? You know, what? Because it's a huge change, isn't it? It's massive. It's massive. And also, I think people put that pressure on. Oh, no, actually, that's wrong. You put the pressure on yourself. I did anyway, of, okay, now you live in New Zealand. Everything better be perfect. Look where you live. You better appreciate it. So if you do feel a little bit, oh, no, you start to feel guilty, don't you? And then you start to think, oh, I should be grateful. It's like this whole big mind game thing going on, I'm sure, for everyone. But yeah, I really appreciate you being honest about that and saying that it wasn't easy for the first few months.
Yeah. And I think it was obviously the biggest thing that we've ever done as a family or as individuals to just uproot your life and move to literally the other side of the world. We couldn't be farther away from America than we are right now, but it was what we decided to do. And then you mentioned earlier, did we visit? We thought about having like a scouting trip, or at the very least, maybe me and a buddy could come over here to check things out. But at the end of the day, we just did the math on that, and it could have been anywhere between $5,000 and $10,000, depending on how long you wanted to stay. And we decided that money would be better spent when we actually arrive. So for anybody who's thinking, should they ultimately, that's going to be your decision. But I'm really happy how things worked out without ever visiting. We did as much research as you possibly could, and to know that New Zealand was where we wanted to be. And then we sure were happy to have the additional funds to support us when we got here.
Yeah, that's a great point, actually. That is a good point. So coming from a tight-knit community with all your family around you, and now you're living in New Zealand, in Auckland, is there any feelings of, and I know we just touched on it before about your settling in period and things like that, but do you feel lonely, or do you feel like you've done the right thing? I think that's also a really good question. Kira and I are very supportive of each other, and we have been our entire relationship, right? We just try to build each other up. And if the other person wants to set a goal and they need help achieving it, we try to help each other achieve those goals. And for us, we're very much of the same mind when it comes to our daughter. She is more important than anything I want to do or anything that Kira wants to do. And just focusing
that like everything we're doing is for her, helps us not feel so isolated because we are a family and we'll always be a family no matter where we are in the world. We have been able to meet some people from the Slack group too, which has been very beneficial. The North Shore community is actually pretty big, which I was surprised about. Ginger and Greg, we met up with them. Andrea and Ross, we met with them. Rachel and Dylan, they're actually really close friends of ours now. They have a daughter who's 1 year older than our daughter, so they spend a lot of time together having fun.
So happy. That makes me so happy. It really does.
And we met some other Americans too. We met from outside of the group, but they're fantastic people.
Yeah. And that's what you
They
need.
got here a little before we did. So they were able to help us along, give us some tips and tricks we might have not been aware of, which is what I am willing to do as well. I want to pay it forward and help out anybody any way I can on the biggest thing you'll ever do.
Yeah, it really is, isn't it? Oh, thank you, Ben. That's such a lovely way. So my question was going to be, is there anything you would have done differently if you were to do it all again? Oh, no, we haven't talked about you bringing your suitcases over as well, because you did. We were going to talk about that, weren't we? Because you didn't bring anything, did you?
Sure.
You didn't ship anything over. You just came over with your suitcases.
We did 7 suitcases, and then my parents shipped us 5 pretty large cardboard boxes that we had assembled. There's a service called Ship Go that we used, which other people in the Slack group were talking about. So for no furniture, none of that. And when we started looking at moving over, the lead times on shipping containers were like 6 to 8 months. And then it's okay. So you pack up your whole house and you ship it over, but then you're going to have to buy new things anyway, because you have to wait like 6 months for it to get there. So for us, it didn't make sense. I think those lead times are quite less now, which is good for anybody who may want to bring over a household full of stuff. But yeah, we sold everything. The one thing that Kira and I really missed, we had a California King bed and bed frame that was crafted by the Amish. Like it was basically an heirloom. Like we had it designed and built for us, but it would have been really cool to pass that down. And nothing feels like your own bed, but
No.
we're getting by okay without it. And yeah, like you said, 7 suitcases and 5 boxes. We basically decided we'll just start over here with all the stuff we weren't able to bring, and things are more expensive. But again, if you do your research and you try to budget for that, you can do the cost assessment. Would it be worth paying the money to ship it all over, or is it worth saving that money and buying it new when you're in New Zealand?
Yeah. So is there anything you would do differently if you were to do it all again?
The one thing we really miss is the bed.
Good idea.
That would be really cool to have. But again, a bed, you don't need a 20-foot shipping container just for your bed. That seems quite extreme. And then I thought about it too. I know you can rent a portion of a shipping container, but logistically, I think that's on you. And what would be the chances that someone else in St. Louis would be using a shipping container to ship to New Zealand, and then they would have 10 or 15 feet on it for us to put stuff on? I don't think it would have worked out that way. But it would have been nice to bring over maybe a couple more suitcases of like our daughter's toys and clothes and things that we decided we could have bought new, just things that remind you of home.
Yeah. So that's what you do differently. You just bring a little bit
I think so.
more things. Yeah. I've got to say, when you said, when I read it on the Slack, when you said, oh, we're coming over with 7 suitcases, I was thinking, wow, that is brave. Especially when you've got your daughter as well, because their toys alone usually take them about 7 suitcases.
Right.
Thinking, what else have you brought?
It could have.
Yeah.
We downsized quite a bit. But there's actually one of my favorite stores in New Zealand is Kmart, which used to be in America and is no longer operating there. So it's really cool to have like Kmart nearby.
Yeah.
And they opened a Costco, which is the only one in the country. It's also pretty close to where we are at. And that's an American company, and they have a lot of really good deals on stuff there.
Yeah.
Too. So
Yeah.
we're still able to do the shopping that we want to do.
Yeah. And I think it's important to say as well, I don't know if I've ever mentioned this, but I think it's important to say, if you're listening to this podcast or watching it, the second-hand market in New Zealand is super high quality. Everything that we've bought second-hand, and we've bought like a lot of stuff. I don't know, back in England, like you buy second-hand stuff and it was always a bit manky. It was always like, oh no, it just looks a bit rubbish. But here they seem to sell stuff when it's still really good. And so when you buy it, it's really good quality. So I think that's important to mention as well is.
It is, yeah.
Yeah.
That's a very good point. So they're called hospice shops
Yeah.
here, which I was really unfamiliar with. So basically every dollar you spend there goes to help care for someone in hospice, and all of the items are donated, which is a fantastic business model for society. But you're right, there are really good things. We found like bedding for our beds there, kitchen utensils you can get. We actually bought a brand new silverware set that was still in the box at one of the hospice shops. They packaged it, put a new sticker on it to resell it. So that thrift shopping is very big here. And it is fun. If you've got the time to do it, it is a fun thing to do.
It really is. It really is. Oh, Ben, thank you so much for chatting with me today. I've been dying to catch up with you and just to find out all about your story. And because you've been in the community for a long time. So it was an interesting journey to watch that you were just finally making it over. And I'm so happy that you're settling in. And I just think what a lucky little girl Cora is. She's going to grow up and know that her mum and dad did this for her, made all those sacrifices, and just, wow, that's pretty special, isn't it? And also, I know she's not here, Kira, but please, can you just tell her thank you for me? Thank you for bringing her skills over to New Zealand. So yeah, that's super special as well, because again, yeah, I'm always very appreciative and of course of you as well, but I don't know anything about IT, so I can't talk about that. But I do know about hospitals and the need for those skills to be brought over to this country. So please give her a big thank you for me.
Sure.
So Ben, I'm going to let you get back to work because I know you're on your lunch hour and you stopped to do this podcast with me. I really appreciate you. Is there anything I haven't covered that you can just think, oh, just before I go, I just want to say that, or have I pretty much covered everything?
Yeah, I think the one thing that I found difficult here, and I wasn't expecting it to be so difficult, was the job search, because my qualifications were on the green list also. And I was under the impression once I get here and I'm onshore, it would be relatively easy to get a job. But the market's really tough right now and you just have to be diligent. So I applied to 40 something jobs and it just takes one interview. I had one company reach back out for an interview. I did 2 rounds of interviews and then I was presented the job offer. If you're determined to do it, you certainly can make it happen. It's just a tough time in New Zealand for job searching at the moment.
Mm-hmm.
And then if we have a couple minutes, I just wanted to highlight some of the things that
of course
we found very pleasantly surprising. So here in the North Shore, the crosswalks, many of them are actually speed bumps, which make cars have to slow down. And that's something that is very foreign to us in the United States. Like in the United States, you got to wait and then you got to check both sides to make sure that nobody's coming. But here, pedestrians always have the right of way, which is really cool. We see so many people biking and exercising, which is really cool. It makes you question, should I be out there doing that too? Everybody seems so fit here, which is awesome. I mentioned a little bit about the kid-centric restaurants, but there's also play places in the malls too. Every mall has a child play place, and even like the hardware stores have it, which is really cool. And McDonald's play places are still a thing here, which I didn't know were in existence anywhere in the world still. So that was a very neat thing to see.
So they don't have those in America?
Society as a whole, they did. So when I grew up in the 90s, McDonald's play places were a big thing, but I don't remember when they took them out. Probably like the early 2000s, they started taking them out.
Yeah.
Well, we're from anyway. It could be different in other parts of the States, but I haven't seen one in a long time. And then there's no trash on the sides of the highways here. There's very few pieces of trash at the parks and playgrounds, which is very nice to see. And then there's public restrooms available all over the place that you don't need to ask somebody for a key to use. In the States, if you want to use a public bathroom, it's usually locked or out of order. They're just plentiful here and they're clean and tidy. And yeah, I think the other big surprise was the number of cafes is quite astounding. In St. Louis, there were maybe like 10 and 5 of those are Starbucks, right? you know where you're going to go for coffee. But here in the North Shore, literally, you can walk 2 blocks and you can see 5 different cafes. They are plentiful, and the coffee is very high quality. It's much different and much better in the best possible way.
Yeah. Yeah. That's what New Zealand, one major thing New Zealand can hold its hands up and say, we have got the best coffee in the world without a doubt. It is
I heard it on your podcast and I was skeptical, but it's true.
Oh, it is
Very
true. Yeah. 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 Another story I was going to just tell you about my daughter, but then I know, anyway, she's a trained barista now. And if you get her talking about coffee, she could talk about it for years about how amazing New Zealand coffee is. But it's a real skill that in New Zealand, you can't pour a cup of coffee unless you're a trained barista, and it's super serious. We had a cafe back in England and we'd just put anyone on the coffee machine. It would just be like, yeah, just whack it in the cup and get it out. But over here, it's
right.
Fantastic. It really is. Yeah. So was that all your points?
Yeah. So those are the very pleasant surprises. And then we've been here long enough to know the things that we miss, right? So we miss like authentic Mexican queso dip.
So many people say that. Yes.
So if you're in America and you want to take the plunge over here, eat as much Mexican and Tex-Mex as you can before you come, because you can't get it over here. And then the grocery chain Aldi's is fantastic. Back in America, I know it's in the UK too. They don't have that here at all. So we miss that grocery chain because they have a lot of really good products. And then like sliced deli turkey isn't available year round here, which I was quite surprised about. Like you go to the meat counter and you're like, hey, yeah, can I get half a kilo of sliced turkey? And they're like, no, we don't have that. Like, oh, okay. Yeah. So I guess you have to wait. You got to wait till the Christmas holiday to get the turkey you want to eat. And then the other, like my favorite food type is American barbecue. It's so good. And it's regional specific. There's Kansas style, Texas style, Carolina style. It's all fantastic. You can't get it here. If and when we go back to the States, I'm going to binge on barbecue.
Yeah, yeah. So is it like a barbecue restaurant that you just go to and there's a big barbecue in the middle of the restaurant and just like serving up all these stuff?
They have, it could be half a dozen giant smoking machines that smoke it for 12 to 18 hours. Like it's a overnight process, and then they shave it up and sell it. It's lunchroom style, right? Like you get a tray and you say, oh, I want 8 ounces of the brisket and fries and baked beans. And then they put it all on the tray for you and send you on your way. It's quite an experience if you haven't been through it. But American barbecue is fantastic.
Oh, it makes me want to go there now and try it. And that Tex-Mex.
Tex-Mex is really good.
Yeah. You know what to, don't you? Get your own little restaurant going. Never mind your IT business. Put that to one side and get your own little Tex-Mex restaurant going. And
I'll have to run that by the boss first, I think.
Oh, Ben, I'm gonna let you go because I've kept you too long. But you've been a wealth of knowledge and just given as a highlight of what it's like to just come from America and set up a new life in New Zealand. And I really appreciate you. Like, I know I said it before, but I really appreciate you just taking the time to be so open and honest about it and not sugarcoating it all. And just it prepares people, doesn't it? It just prepares people for what they're coming to, and the good and the bad as well.
Absolutely. I think the knowledge is power, right? The more you understand before you make that big decision, the better off you'll be. So
yes.
I'm always happy to help anybody in the group if they want to reach out.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Ben. Give my love to Kira and Cora, and I'll let you go. Thank you so much. Wishing you all the best and happiness and good luck in your new job, and I'll speak to you on Slack.
Thanks. We'll talk soon.
Okay. Thank you, Ben.
Bye.
Bye.
I really hope you enjoyed that show as much as I enjoyed recording it. If you're moving to New Zealand and you are interested in joining the Slack group, the private community group that we raved about and talked about on today's show, then you need to head over and get our free 5-day video guide. This is a video guide that sends you a video every day for 5 days, sharing some aspect of what life in New Zealand is like. It's absolutely free. And then when you get to the 5th day, you will be given the option of whether or not you want to join the private community, the one that we talked about. It's a fabulous, fabulous resource. I don't need to say anything more because you've already heard all about it. Go over, take the free 5-day video guide, get to day 5, and then you can decide whether or not you'd like to be a member and join our private community along with me and Brian and all those other fabulous people that are walking along the same path as you and making the move to New Zealand. So head on over to www.nzahead.com/free. Head on over to www.nzahead.com/free and get your free 5-day video guide. Get to day 5 and then you decide if you want to come and join us in our private membership group. I hope to see you on the other side. Imagine this. You live in America with your family. Your husband is in the military. And then suddenly he gets injured and he decides to do a different career. He thinks, why don't we move to New Zealand and I'll become a chef? So you move all your family to the other side of the world and you start again. How would that look?
Hearing all of these people talk about how prohibitively expensive New Zealand is, I sat Scott down, because he's the money guy, like a couple of different times, and I was like, we need to have a talk because you're telling me that we can afford to live here, but from what I'm hearing.
In this week's episode, you're going to meet Katie. Katie was that wife who moved with her family to the other side of the world to start a completely new life. And you're going to find out exactly what that looks like.